Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to another week 4 of conflict and peace management. I hope you had a nice weekend and everything was fine with you and your loved ones. Yeah, let's get into work this week. I believe that you've been able to watch the first 3 lectures on peace and conflict management, and I believe you've been able to be making your notes out of this. This is very important. Once you miss any of these steps, it will be difficult for you to catch up with them. That's why you need to listen to these notes, these videos, so that you can make your notes, and there is going to be a kind of connection you're going to make out of there. So this is very important. This is week 4. We are gradually moving. This week, our focus will be on analysis of the conflict, analysis of conflict or conflict analysis. The intention is to understand the mapping and, analysis conflict. So our objective for this week is that you should be able to understand what it means to analyze conflict and explain its importance in peace and conflict management. Number 2, to be able to identify the major actors and stakeholders involved in a conflict. Another objective is that you must be able to construct a conflict map showing relationship, showing tensions, showing sources of conflict, and explained stages of conflict escalation. These are the expectations. You must be able to describe conflict cycle and how it develops over time. You must be able to identify the differences between the root cause, the immediate cause, or causes and the triggers of conflict. We want you to be able to apply root cause analysis to a real or hypothetical conflict. And at the end of the day, when it comes to church conflict, you must be able to look into that systematically and identify possible points of intervention. Because if I tell you there's not going to be a crisis in the church, we are simply telling lies. There's going to be conflict in the ministry, but our intention is that you'll be able to analyze conflict systematically and identify, the point of intervention and be able to develop appropriate strategies of conflict transformation and resolution. So in the future, I want to see you, being in boards, in committees that resolve conflict within the diocese and in the church at large. That is my desire and my expectation. So that's why whatever we are doing is very, very important, because there is a lot of work in the future for us to do in the church. Now, let's look at what is conflict analysis to start with. Conflict is really as simple as this person A is against this person B. It's more than that. Most conflict involves multiple people or groups of people. Okay? Not just one person to another person, not A to B, but groups of people. And we need to understand what we mean by of people. Another thing is the conflict interest. Conflict interest. We must be able to understand conflict interest. We must be able to understand different perceptions. We must be able to understand historical grievances. We must be able to understand unequal power in conflict, communication problems. What again? Unmet needs. What again? Institutional structure. Like we have said in previous lecture, what again? Cultural or theological differences also are essential parts of conflict. So conflict analysis is the systemic process, okay, of examining a conflict for understanding's sake. Who is involved, what they want, why they are in conflict, how the conflict develop, what keep it going, what are the motivations for the conflict, who are the sponsors of the conflict, and where opportunities for resolution exist. So conflict analysis does not begin by asking who is right or who is wrong. Don't forget the definition. Conflict analysis is the systematic process, okay, of examining a conflict to understand. So we are not asking who is right, who is wrong. The question is what is happening and why is it happening? And what factors are sustaining the conflict? If we need to solve any problem, this must be the question to ask. What is happening? Why is it happening? And what factors sustain the conflict? Once you can understand these three, you can deal with that crisis. And this distinction, you must be able to distinguish between them. This distinction is extremely important, for Christian leaders like you and I, that we need to understand. So people will come and tell you what is happening. People will come and discuss with you what is happening. A lot of people will come around and explain. And when you don't hear the other side, you can feel the other person is the right person. But by the time you listen to people on both sides, you'll be able to say, there's a big problem to be solved here. Okay. So why is conflict analysis matter? Why do we need to look into the conflict systematically, to give it systematic approach for us to understand why? Okay. A person cannot effectively resolve a conflict, all right, that they do not understand. It is difficult to resolve any conflict you don't understand. So poor conflict management often occur because leaders act before gathering information. 2, poor conflict management occur because leaders listen to only one side. It also occurs because confuse symptoms with causes. They confuse symptoms with the causes. They assume most times that the loudest person is the victim. For those of you who are family person, who have more than one children in the family, one child, you will see when there's a conflict between 2, 3 children, there's one of them that will be maybe loudest and crying, you may be thinking that's the person who was right or who is right. But by the time you begin to analyze the situation, you will notice that the person who is the loudest is not the victim. Also, poor management of conflict occur when we mistake personal disagreements with institutional problems. Personal disagreement or institutional problem. And of course, when the leader don't address the immediate problem, while ignoring the underlying, causes. Let me give you an example. Suppose 2 church members are arguing about the use of the church hall. That's an example. So the immediate argument may be, who has the right to use the hall on Saturday? But when you investigate further investigation may reveal one ministry feel ignored by church leadership. The other ministry believes it has priority. And of course, there is no written facility use policy. Previous requests were handled inconsistently. All right. The two ministry leaders have had disagreements in several years. So the all booking is therefore the presenting issue, not necessarily the root cause. So, but when you hear there's a disagreement of the booking, if you use that to judge the matter, you will run into trouble. You need to investigate into other underlying issues that makes the whole booking a problem. There are three levels of conflict, causes. Three levels of conflict causes. A useful way to analyze conflict is to distinguish between root cause or causes, immediate cause or causes, triggers. Let's look at the three root causes. So there are deep-seated, conditions that create the environment in which conflict develops. Deep-seated condition. For example, inequality, injustice, poor leadership structure, unresolved historical grievances, discriminations, competition, maybe for resources or something else, lack of accountability, unclear authority, when authority is not clear, when there's confusion in leadership, long-standing mistrust. These are likely root cause for conflict you see. And when we look at immediate causes, there are issues that are directly contributing to current conflict. Okay, for example, disagreement over finance or leadership appointment or property use or disciplinary action. It can be ministry responsibility. It can be communication breakdown. So that can be immediate cause. And when you look at the trigger, which is the part, a trigger is an event, a situation that caused the conflict to become viable or feasible or escalate. That is the trigger. What caused the trigger that caused this? It can be an angry email or mail. It can be a public accusation. Oh, you raise up your hand and you say something. It can be leadership decision. No. This person is going to use it, not your department. That it can be a social media post. These days in church, people fight for position. Something like that can trigger, a conflict. Removal from position. Oh, you stepped down, let somebody else take up. An insulting statement or unexpected announcement that we make in church can cause a conflict, can be a trigger. So the important principle here is that the trigger is not necessarily the cause. There is a root cause, there is immediate cause, and of course, the trigger. So the trigger is not necessarily the cause. So a match may start a fire, but the match is not the same thing as the fuel. So do you hear that? A match may start a fire, but the match is not the same thing as what fuels it. Let's look at the conflict mapping. What is conflict mapping? Now, conflict mapping is a visual method of representing the parties involved, their relationship, area of disagreement or disagreement. What again? The alliances between them, power relationship, their communication patterns, and of course, other external influences. So it allows the conflict analyst to see the conflict rather than merely describe it. Does that make sense? When you map, it helps to see the crisis, not to just describe what is happening. So now let's look at the elements of a conflict map. What are the elements? A basic conflict map will include 4 things. Basic conflict map may involve 4 things. 4 things. Number 1 is primary parties, those directly involved in the conflict. Okay, primary, for example, the rector, the church council, they are directly involved. That's primary. Number 2 is the secondary parties, those indirectly involved or affected, the members, the youth ministry, the women ministry, the diocesan leadership, the lay leaders. Those are secondaries. Influencers, people who can influence the conflict without being direct party. Okay. Former leader, former clergy, former priest, respected elders, diocesan official or bishop nominee inside that church, influential donor, somebody who gave, those are influencers. When you see a fight or conflict in any church, note that there is the primary, there's the secondary, there is an influencer. All right. And number 4, relationship. The map should indicate whether relationships are cooperative, tense, hostile, broken, neutral, dependent. Those are the relationships. You must be able to describe that relationship. So imagine a conflict between a rector and church council. Now, there is the assistant leadership. There is the rector, the tension, church council, disagreement, congregation, divided, supporter, and critic. Do you understand what I'm talking about? I'm going to put that in your chat after this meeting. I'm going to put that chart, that map. I'm going to put it in your example. I'm going to put it on your platform. Diocesan leadership, from that to rector, from rector to tension, from tension to church council to disagreement to congregation, we divide. And once the congregation divides, there will be supporter, there will be critics. We need to understand, this mapping. So the map can be expanded to include the finances, communications, authority, personalities. We can theological agreement. He said this when he was preaching. It doesn't matter. Let's leave that. Theological disagreements and historical grievances. Those are the way we can expand the conflict. So this is very interesting. Now, when it comes to conflict mapping questions, when constructing a conflict map, the question we ask are who, what, how, all right, why? Those are questions we ask. Who are the primary parties? Who are secondary? Who are the influencers? Who are the power? Who is affected? What is the disagreement? What does each party want? We are asking about what are the underlying interests. How do the party relate? How do they communicate? How has the conflict, escalated? And when it comes to the question of why did the conflict begin? What historical factor are involved? What keep the conflict going? Those are the questions we ask. How? What? Who? Why? These are questions to ask. Looking at the stakeholder analysis, conflict mapping tells us who is connected to the conflict. Okay? Stakeholder analysis goes further by looking and examining their interests, their needs, their influence, their position, their fears, and even the potential contribution to resolution. So a stakeholder, okay, is an individual. It can also be a group. It can be an institution that is directly involved, that is affected by the conflict. All right, who can influence the conflict? Who has interest, even in the outcome? These are stakeholders. So it's a matter of position versus interest versus need. What does the person says they want? I want the committee chairman removed. Interest. Why they want it? I believe the chairman is making a decision without consulting us. That is the interest. The need. I need to feel respected, feel included, and treated fairly. That's the need. So there is always the position, there's always the interest, and there's also the need. So the key principle here is that people often fight over positions when their underlying interests or needs may be negotiable. This is very important. Power at times can be in conflict. Conflict analysis must examine power too. Power. Power is the ability to influence decisions. You are able to influence resources. You are able to influence information, influence institution, influence outcomes. And this power we're talking about can be formal, that is derived from official position. Okay. For example, church leaders, rector, chairpersons, treasurer, they have formal power. And we have informal power. That is power that is derived from the relationship, derived from the experience, power derived from the wealth, power derived by the popularity, by knowledge, by social influence. That is informal power. A person may have little formal authority or enormous influence, enormous informal influence. Let me give you an example. Somebody is the sponsor, maybe is the most powerful man in that church who has money. It may not be a direct power, but it's indirect power. People like that are in church. I've seen it. A lot of churches where such people throw the priest or rector off balance. They have informal power. There are people like that in the church. For example, if you have a retired bishop in your church or retired clergy in your church, that's informal power. Those people, you have to treat them with respect and honor them. If you make them your problem, you are not going to last in that church. They are power. They are informal power. Or some people are powerful or popular. They just need to go around the houses of the member. That the next PCC meeting, this is what they are agreeing on. Once those people go around, you are done. That matter will not see the light of the day. They are informal power. Or people who are knowledgeable. If you have professors in your church who understand, who have seen through, who are exposed, and you just go to that place and you do what you like. Such people can stand up one day and speak, and everybody will follow them. So, informal, they are powerful people, informal power. It's not only your treasurer that is powerful. It's not only the chairperson of committee that is powerful. Those people are in the pew. They don't occupy any formal position, but they can call 10 people, and the atmosphere of that church will be ungovernable for you. They are informal power. So those people, if they are involved in any conflict against you, it takes divine intervention for you to come out of that issue peacefully, without breaking your bones. So let's look at conflict escalation. Conflict does not normally move from peace directly to serious hostility. No. They often escalate gradually. Okay? I'm going to tell you the stages of escalation. The first one is stage 1, which is latent conflict. Now, under latent conflict, the underlying condition exists. But conflict is openly expressed. Underlying condition exists, but the conflict is openly expressed. Let me give an example of that. Members are unhappy with leadership, but they keep quiet. They won't talk. They're not going to say anything. They keep quiet. That's a latent conflict. The stage 2 is imagined conflict. Imagined conflict. At that point, people begin to recognize the disagreement. They recognize that's imagined conflict. They begin to be complaint, begin to appear during meeting. You see people begin to talk about, during meeting. They will raise up their heads. So in your midtime, I can ask you, which stage of conflict is this? I will cite an example and I will ask you to pick what is the answer. You can see something like that. The third stage is open conflict. Open. Don't forget where we're coming from. We're talking about latent. We're talking from latent to imagine, from imagine now to open. So when we talk about open, it's when disagreement became public, that everybody can see. At that point, member openly challenge the leadership, raise up their hands, and tell you to your face. In the church service, all right? Stage 4 is escalation. When people who are involved become increasingly hostile. At that point, you see accusation, you see insults. At that point, you see threats. They begin to write letters to the diocesan, write threat letter to you. Give 24 hours to move out of our vicarage. That's hostility. All right? You begin polarization, withdraw. People stop taking communion. People stop coming to morning prayer. People begin to confront the pastor. I know you have seen some of those things happening at one time. When it got to the level of escalation, it's a big thing. Stage 5 is crisis. Crisis. Normal relationship and communication will break down at this point. They don't want to see themselves again. There's nothing to talk about any longer. We're done with this man. Take him away. Crisis. Stage 6 is de-escalation. The intensity begin to decrease at that point. It get to the peak as the crisis level. We get to the peak, then the map begin to come down. That is de-escalation. All right, at that time the intensity decreases. Then after de-escalation, the next one is resolution or transformation. At that point, the parties address the issue and begin to rebuild relationship. At that point, if it's a clergy that is involved, transfer will have taken place. The best thing is in some situations, they may not even transfer. They just, bishop have to call them to his office and, settle the matter. If it's among the PCC member, the clergy rector have to call the people, the parties, talk to both of them and, and resolve the issue. So those are the stages, okay, of conflict escalation. All right. Then we also have the conflict circle. Okay. Conflict is better understood as a circle rather than a single event. It's not a single event, it's a circle. A simplified conflict circle is like this. Let me describe it. Underlying condition to grievance or tension, okay, to trigger or triggering event, from triggering event to confrontation, from confrontation to escalation, from escalation to crisis, from crisis to de-escalation, from de-escalation to negotiation or resolution, from resolutions to reconciliation or transformation, then to new condition. So new condition is the end of the circle. The beginning is underlying condition. So what is in the conflict circle? I'm giving you a text now, an example of text you may, you may have to answer. In the conflict circle, what is the 5th point in the circle? What is the first in the circle? What is the last in the circle? What is the penultimate? Those are questions that may likely come up to show that you understand the circle. However, if the root cause remain unresolved, the resolution again, if it's not resolved, temporary peace, okay, at that point, if it's a church issue with pastor, they ask another clergyman to come and take over. I feel that that's temporary peace. Unresolved issues still there, don't forget. New triggers may come from there. Renewed conflict can start all over again, because the person that they send may not be able to, may even cause more damages. So this is why some churches experience the same conflict repeatedly with different people. All right, with different people. So this is very, very important. So those are things we expect you to understand, this week. Please take time to read through the subject, the books, and all that we have for this week, and you'll be able to understand what is expected of you. And I can give you a case study in your test, expecting you to tell me the stages of reconciliation. What should the church do? What is the Christian approach to conflict? And don't forget, when you talk about Christian approach to conflict, conflict analysis in a Christian context must go beyond technical skill. It has to do with the Christian leader must consider the truth, speak the truth in love, listening. Everyone should quick to listen. Like James 1:19 says, listening. It involves reconciliation. It involves direct engagement, humility, and a lot of prayers. Those are stages of, Christian approach. Telling the truth. Not only that, listening very well to people, reconciliation, direct engagement, prayer, humility. Those are the stages of Christian, reconciliation. Important warning for church leaders is this. Christian reconciliation does not mean pretending that nothing happened. It doesn't mean that suppressing legitimate complaint. When you hear a complaint about anything, investigate into it. And sometimes forcing people to forgive immediately. We do that. Oh yeah, let's forgive ourselves. Sometimes protecting powerful individuals from accountability. We want to protect people that they will not be accountable. Calling every disagreement the work of the devil sometimes. Everything we causes is not the work of the devil. Demanding silence in the name of unity. But true reconciliation requires truth, justice, accountability, forgiveness, and restoration. So this is very, very important. So please don't forget what we are talking about today, that we need to remember these 5 principles. Every conflict has history. And the feasible issue may not be the real issue. Another takeaway point from here is that positions are not the same as interest. Another one is that conflict escalates when communication, trust, and relationship deteriorates. And of course, sustainable peace requires addressing the root cause. Okay? So I will talk to you again. If you have any question about what I've said today, please find time to see me so we can talk about it. Remember that conflict is not always the enemy of the church. Unexamined conflict is the enemy of the church. And of course, a mature Christian leader does not merely stop arguments. The leader seeks to understand what lies beneath the arguments. They address the issues, they restore relationship, they establish justice, and they create structure that make future conflict, less destructive. Until we do that, we have a long way to go. I will talk to you again. Have a nice day.